2 weeks prior to Christmas, it took place. After a 12-hour shift, I was still in my scrubs and waiting in line at the grocery store with a half-priced box of peppermint bark and some eggs when I received the call. As if she had done this 100 times before, the woman on the other end spoke with speed and efficiency. "Ma'am, I'm calling on behalf of Valleywide Collections to inquire about a $72,381, 17 overdue debt in your name. This is the last effort before legal action is taken, even though we have sent several notices." My heart stopped beating. My mind was unable to keep up. "Which loan?" With a shaky breath, I asked. She said the name again. The name of the lending organization was mentioned. The sum, the day. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in my car, staring blankly at the windshield as snowflakes started to fall on the glass. I hardly recalled checking out, but I must have. Something had to go wrong. I had never taken out a loan of that kind before. Other than shopping and nursing school, I seldom ever utilized credit. I was always careful, even meticulous. How then? That evening, I combed through bank records, old emails, and login sites until I came upon a signature. Mine. However, it wasn't. It was too near. My name had been faked. I recognized the person already. The answer was screaming loud and clear in my stomach, even though I didn't want to acknowledge it. My dad. The man who used to read me dragon and night stories before bed, who gave me quarters for each. I brought home and showed me how to tie my shoes. The man who vanished from my life for over 3 years, only to resurface as if nothing had changed during family dinners. And now, presumably, the man who silently destroyed my financial future. I had trouble sleeping that night. I kept attempting to go back in time to every instance where something had seemed off. In order to correct a tax error, I loaned him my Social Security card. He asked me to co-sign something so he could look more official, when he used charm to get me to fill in some spaces. And I did, being the obedient daughter that I was, because I still wanted to think he loved me in spite of everything: the drinking, the lying, the debt. My desire to be the good daughter persisted. I was the one who consistently avoided causing trouble. He was the one who consistently provided support and encouragement, who showed forgiveness, even though he wasn't deserving. I headed to my folks' house the following weekend for our yearly tree trimming event. My mom was in the kitchen savoring a ham, humming to the old Bing Crosby Christmas records she pulled out each year. With his new fiancée shining like she was from a holiday magazine, my younger brother Tyler was putting lights on the front porch. And there he was, my dad, chuckling at something my aunt had said while he stood by the fire with a mug of cider, like my whole world hadn't just been wrecked by him. As I entered, he grinned and said, "Hey, sweetheart, I'm glad you made it." I felt like screaming. Rather, I gave a nod. I sat in a daze all night long. I didn't eat, but nobody noticed. When I held my cider, no one inquired as to why my hands were shaking. I couldn't be seen. They started giving out ornaments at one point, customized ones that my mother purchased each year. I watched as Tyler, Emily, Mom, Dad, and, for heaven's sake, Emily's dog all discovered their names. Mine was absent. Too nonchalantly, my mom said, "Oops, I must have overlooked ordering yours this year." I bit my lips so forcefully that blood came out. They couldn't even bother to put me on the blasted tree, even though I was working extra shifts to support my family and shouldering the emotional burden of keeping everyone together. Not that I was a daughter. I served as a stand-in. I was an inaudible filler for space. An afterthought? I cornered my dad in the kitchen later that evening after everyone had gone to bed. "A debt collector called me," I said. I spoke steadily and quietly. He pretended to be innocent as he blinked. "What sort of debt? A loan under my name? The whole amount was $72,000. He gave me a prolonged gaze. Then he shrugged without blinking. He said, "I had no choice. That, or losing everything, was the choice. I intended to repay it." I simply gazed at him. "My name was utilized by you," he said. "I am your father," as if it clarified everything. "We are related." Without saying another word, I turned and left the house. But I knew something had shattered inside of me at that precise instant, in the faint blue glow of snow and holiday lights. For years, I kept quiet. However, I was no longer able to this time. When I first understood that my father's love had conditions, I was 8 years old. Little things were the first. I had to work for his attention if I wanted it. I had to do better to get his approval. He used to say, "Don't be weak," whenever I started crying. "I take it you're tougher than that?" I believed him once. I thought that if I worked hard enough, kept quiet enough, and smiled enough, he would love me as much as he did before he started to disappear every other week and act like my mom was a bother. By high school, I was able to read his moods more accurately than I could Shakespeare. I knew to keep my door closed if there was any hint of sharpness in his voice. I prepared myself for a slammed cupboard or a passive-aggressive comment thrown at me if his footfall were too heavy. I was never hit by him. At times, though, I wished he had hit me. That type of suffering would have been simpler to label. Rather, he showed me the kind of love that required reciprocation. He kept track of all the favors. That was like a transaction of affection. Achievement grades, scholarships, and flawless attendance became my obsession. It was the only time he appeared proud of me, not because I desired recognition. However, it was always fleeting. The bar would climb once more a few days later, and I would be frantically trying to prove myself everywhere. My brother Tyler, in the meantime, he had no responsibilities or tasks to complete. My parents co-signed his third attempt at college after he failed 2 community colleges, as if it were no big deal. By the age of 22, he had been involved in 2 car crashes. My father still referred to him as the golden boy. I was the trustworthy one. I was the one responsible for fixing things. They only called upon the ghost when they wanted to tidy up. In retrospect, I see how I was raised to believe that my purpose in the family was to be helpful rather than adored. I will always remember that particular Christmas. I had recently been accepted on a full scholarship to nursing school. After my last final, I took my parents home in a gift-wrapped envelope that contained a framed copy of my acceptance letter and a note expressing my gratitude for their support. My dad gave them a hazy nod as I gave it to them, saying, "That's nice, kiddo. Could you check the car battery later? It's misbehaving." He gave Tyler a brand new iPhone that same evening for no apparent reason. No reference to my approval. This is not a celebration, just expectations and silence. I began to realize that, in their opinion, my worth was in what I could offer rather than in who I was. So I went to work. Even though it meant missing meals or sleeping in my car during rotations, I persevered through nursing school, took on nighttime shifts, and paid my bills. All because I believed that they might finally notice me if I made enough sacrifices. However, they didn't. I once learned that Tyler had fallen late on his rent once more. My mother called me crying and said, "Please, just this once, sweetheart, could you help?" Without hesitation, I transferred the funds. I couldn't bear to hear her cry, not because I wanted to, because I had been taught that as long as other people were okay, my discomfort was okay. The calls continued even after I got a full-time job. "Tyler is attempting to get back on his feet. Your dad needs new tires, and the energy payment is past due. Would you be able to watch him for a few weeks?" And I did, again and again. That's what good girls do, I told myself. That is the role of family. I didn't realize how twisted up everything was until my best friend Nina confronted me one night in frustration. "I take it you send them money each month?" I answered, stirring my coffee. "Yeah. And how frequently do they just call you to chat? Or make a check-in? Or express gratitude?" I stopped. She bent over. "They don't love you, Claire. They take advantage of you." Her remarks hurt, not because they were harsh, but because I knew in my heart that she was correct. I had been home for my father's birthday 2 months before that fatal contact from the debt collector. He always said he was going to write a memoir someday, so I saved up for a leather-bound journal and brought it to him. He hardly gave it a glance. "Oh," he responded, preoccupied. "Regards. You shouldn't have wasted money on such a thing. You must be saved. Hey, remember that poker night in Reno?" he asked, laughing, turning to face Tyler. They discussed that weekend vacation for an hour. I sat on the side table, forgotten, my gift still unopened. I sobbed in the bathroom that evening. The tears were unpleasant, quiet, and not very loud. I didn't recognize the girl staring back at me when I looked in the mirror. She appeared worn out, empty, like a support beam on the verge of breaking. I began to ask myself questions that I had put off for years. Why am I constantly attempting to prove myself to individuals who aren't even in my presence? Why do I put up with being treated like a daughter who isn't that important? Above all, if I continue doing this, how much more of myself will I lose? That loan was more than just cash. It served as a symbol, a receipt for each instance in which I was treated as a backup plan and taught that family is everything. On paper, it's a convenient name. It demonstrated that my father had not simply betrayed me. I was never seen by him. And now, I realized that I needed to change. Because if I didn't, I would be using portions of my soul to pay off a loan that I didn't take. As I stared at my small apartment ceiling that night, I said to myself, I've been quiet long enough. However, I will not accept it this time. Something changed inside of me the next morning. There was no huge announcement or spectacular explosion. Somewhere deep in my chest, it was quieter than that, like a steel latch clicking into place. The kind of calm resolution that you aren't even aware of until you realize that you aren't requesting permission to be furious anymore. Still wearing my rumpled scrubs, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the drawer containing all of my correspondence, including bills, debt notices, and creditor statements. I had been gathering them because I was scared to examine them too thoroughly. However, I laid them out like evidence from a crime scene on the kitchen table that morning because I felt as though I was the victim of a crime that had been committed. One envelope was particularly noticeable. It came from a bank I had never heard of before. There was a contract inside. The contract clearly identified me as Claire Elizabeth Monroe. The loan had my name on it. On a paper I had never seen before, my signature was scrawled across the bottom. My heart was racing as I gazed at it for a while. It became real at that point. This was not an error. The mistake was not a clerical one. Tyler wasn't playing around. This was deliberate. My name had been faked. Someone had completed the application, confirmation, and verification processes. They had posed as me, and I knew exactly who it was, deep down in my gut, my dad. I didn't give him a call. I didn't yell, weep, or plead for an answer. I anticipated his words. Like he always did, I knew he would charm, dodge, and gaslight. No. I wasn't going to let him try to dissuade me this time. I didn't want anyone to point out that I was exaggerating. I took a car to the nearby branch indicated on the paper. A manager in a stiff gray suit sat across from me and gave me the look you give someone who is attempting to get out of paying a parking ticket. He arched an eyebrow at me when I said, "That's not my signature." However, his expression softened when I explained that I'm a nurse and that I was working 12-hour shifts at the time this was signed. He retrieved additional records, displayed a scanned copy of their ID to me. I owned it. My real ID, I responded in a stony voice. I didn't give anyone permission to use that. He paused. I'm going to escalate this, he said, but you'll have to report this to the police if it was identity fraud. Fraud involving identity. I felt sick at the words, because it required me to confess in writing, in front of strangers, that my father had legally and emotionally deceived me. It meant acknowledging that my own blood had ruined my finances and caused me to disappear without a trace. I opened all of my bank accounts when I got home. They were frozen by me, opened some new ones. I updated my passwords, placed a credit freeze on file. I did the unimaginable after that. I gave a lawyer a call. Not to exact revenge. Not quite yet, for defense. I wasn't going to be the girl who continued cleaning up after her family's mess for the first time in my life. Even if it meant standing by myself, I was determined to defend myself. I began talking no more in the days that followed. I was unable to send Tyler money to help him again. No, Sunday supper would not be at my house. No, I didn't want to discuss Dad's recent struggles over the phone with my mother. They were perplexed at first. Then they became irate. I sensed the change, too. The balance of power that had always kept me silent was breaking down. They weren't accustomed to my resistance. The manipulation started at that point. You're exaggerating. He had no intention of hurting you. He is your dad. Blood is blood. However, their remarks came with less impact each time, since I had at last given up on them understanding. I could be angry now without their approval. Tyler sent me a note one evening. It was brief and arrogant. You constantly believe that you are superior to us. Look, nobody wants to speak with you. Princess, enjoy your independence. I kept my thumb over the response as I gazed at the computer, but I banned his number rather than responding in writing. I went out for a walk that evening. It was chilly outside. I exhaled clouds of breath. I wasn't prepared for another emotional blow, so I walked with my shoulders down for the first time in years. Because I no longer feared being alone myself. It was better to be by yourself than to be used. I began collecting documents in secret, duplicates of falsified documents. There was evidence of unauthorized access. On the day the loan was signed, I even asked for a copy of the bank's security footage. Weeks passed. But when I eventually saw the shaky video of my father, grinning as if nothing mattered, giving me a fake ID while wearing a jacket I had purchased him for his birthday, I refrained from crying. I refrained from screaming. I simply felt motionless. I had been waiting for this time. The instant I realized that I could no longer safely act as though we were still a family, not just in theory but with concrete evidence, and I had had enough of pretending. They believed that I was still the submissive daughter. The quiet little assistant is still there. The ATM is still there. However, what they were unaware of, the police had already heard from me. The report was already filed by me. Furthermore, I had already opted for calm rather than quiet. I kept it a secret from everyone. No, not to my colleagues. This also applies to my mother. Not to my brother, of course. Behind the scenes, though, I was advancing like a woman in a dark cave with a map and a flashlight. I allowed the chilly air to wake me up like ice water on my skin by taking long walks before sunrise. There was something about that silence, the city just starting to wake up, that allowed me to think clearly, in a strategic manner. I had already discussed the scam with a lawyer. The road ahead would be long, she warned me. Difficult, unpleasant. She cautioned that most situations like this end up in the gray zones. And it gets worse if it involves relatives. Slowly, I nodded. I am aware. She stared at me, silent for a while. But you're not here because you're unsure, she said. You're done, which is why you're here. She was correct. I grinned as usual at work. As if nothing had changed, I continued to chart patient notes, reassure worried family members, and distribute medication. However, something had changed. I now had a border inside of me that was silent but unbreakable. During my breaks, I stopped looking at my phone. I stopped responding to my mother's incessant texts filled with guilt. Your father didn't mean to harm you, you know that. He's simply lost. Perhaps you ought to visit. Let's communicate as a family. I read them. All of them. After that, I shut down the app and let the quiet speak for itself. Since I had already gotten in touch with the Department of Financial Regulation by that point, I had previously submitted documentation contesting the debt. I had previously filed a different identity theft lawsuit. They were all unaware. And that's how I liked it. Let them ponder my whereabouts. Allow them to experience what it was like to be abandoned for a change. However, I wasn't simply vanishing. I was rebuilding, small by small. I got a tiny place downtown after leaving the flat I had been renting close to my father's area. It was older. The walls emitted a groaning sound. There was doubt about the water pressure. It was mine, though. Nobody else had the keys. I did not leave a forwarding address. I updated my phone number, opened new accounts with banks. Every little thing I did felt like a name reclamation. You're safe now, murmured each password change. One day, my mother visited me at work, unexpected. I saw her in the lobby in the middle of her shift, carrying a paper bag filled with pastries that looked like peace offerings. My stomach dropped when I saw her. She appeared smaller than I had recalled, weary. However, I was still able to use the same tone that made my shame tangle. Claire, she replied, trembling with a half smile. Maybe we could talk, I thought. I stopped. I had freezing hands. My chest was constricted. I didn't create any commotion. I didn't speak louder. I simply stated in a low voice, You must go. Her gaze expanded. Please, sweetheart. I came here not to fight. I gave a nod. I am aware. However, this isn't the location. She appeared injured. Are you truly going to abandon your own family? I gave her a direct glance. All of you abandoned me a long time ago. You simply failed to notice. I turned around and left. I didn't turn around. I banned her number that evening. The day she stood up for a man who ruined my future and disappeared like a robber in the night, she had made her decision. Days went by, weeks. Then the letter arrived. A last notification about the loan my father had taken out in my name from the collections agency. It was abrupt, threatening. Chilly. However, there was a notation at the bottom. The account is being investigated for possible fraud. My attorney had fulfilled her duties. It was my time now. When I went back to the police station and gave them my new paperwork, I didn't shudder when I called my father's name this time. I informed the police. I had nothing but this: video evidence, counterfeit signatures, testimonies from witnesses. "You've done your homework?" he observed quietly after reviewing it. I gave a nod. I was forced to. Finally, the question I had been dreading came up. "Would you like to file charges?" We were in such a heavy quiet that I could feel it crushing against my chest. I reflected on the years I had spent with that man. He didn't remember the birthdays, the favors he asked for, the lies he told. When he stole from me, he grinned because he thought I wouldn't fight back. I made eye contact with the officer. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I do." I sat on my new apartment's floor that evening. No furnishings yet. The sound of the rain hitting the windows, me, and a cup of tea. I had never felt so alone in my life. It was the clearest, though. I no longer had a family, not in the conventional sense, not the kind of get-together around the table. However, I had myself, and I was at peace, and there was a fire inside of me that no one could extinguish. They were unaware that I had previously filed everything. They were unaware that once I made the decision to defend myself, I ceased to be their scapegoat. They were unaware that my name would be heard from a courtroom the next time they heard it. Not over the phone. Not from a story about crying. However, from an irrevocable record. The smell of tension and old paper filled the courtroom. I had steady hands. But what about my heart? My heart pounded fiercely beneath my ribs. I had never been inside a courtroom before that day. And most definitely not to oppose the man who was meant to keep me safe. My dad failed to appear. Naturally, he didn't. However, his absence simply made the pile of evidence in my lawyer's hands a woman who had turned into a lighthouse and a shield in my life even more substantial. With assurance, she displayed all the documents, falsified signatures, and financial transactions that suggested fraud. Betrayal, not simply fraud. Deliberate, calculated, and harsh. I got a glimpse of the courtroom audience as we revealed everything to the judge. Incredulous. One of the men in the rear shook his head. Something was whispered to her neighbor by a woman in the front row. I was unknown to them. He was unknown to them. However, they sensed it, because money wasn't the only factor here. This story was about a parent who failed so completely that the wounds were more severe than any debt. The judge silently went over everything. Then at last he said, "This court recognizes the fraudulent use of the plaintiff's identity in light of the substantial evidence that has been presented. A warrant for the defendant's arrest will be issued. The disputed debts will be officially transferred out of the plaintiff's name and deemed the accused's obligation." I refrained from crying. I didn't scream. I simply shut my eyes, and I let out a breath without worry for the first time in years. I returned home that evening and sat on my tiny apartment's bare floor. However, I wasn't the only one who remained silent this time. This time, I felt freedom instead of emptiness. The past was not necessarily over. That didn't mean I didn't still feel the betrayal. However, it meant that I was back in charge. And that was all. The consequences were nearly instantaneous. My mom gave me a call, once more and once more. I didn't respond. Then came the lengthy, meandering email that was part accusatory and half apology. "This wasn't necessary for you to do. You have the option to visit me. You could have relied on me." With my fingers hanging above the keyboard, I gazed at it. I typed 2 words after that: "You were aware." Then pressed send. After that, I blocked her. More loudness wasn't necessary for me. I required room. I required tranquility. It turns out, however, that serenity is not always silent. Peace is sometimes action. Standing tall when they expect you to collapse is sometimes the solution. Sometimes it's about stepping right into and taking ownership of the locations that used to make you feel insignificant. So I did just that. I returned to my previous neighborhood. I passed the house where I used to go on Sundays, the one where my father pretended to be a hero while throwing barbecues. Now it was deserted. For sale. It's funny how easily things fall apart when you base them on false information. I contacted a reporter who reported on predatory family dynamics and financial abuse. I told my narrative, but I didn't reveal my true name. Not to exact revenge, not for show. However, since someone out there possibly viewing this video needed to know, you're not insane. You don't lack gratitude. You're not alone either. Even if they don't bleed, some wounds deplete you. Additionally, some families devour rather than protect. I received a call from my lawyer 2 weeks later. They had located my father. He had been performing odd jobs under a false identity while hiding in a little town 2 states away. He was taken into custody without any problems. Something odd happened to me when I saw the mugshot on the news. I was not enraged. I didn't experience validation. I felt nothing at all. As if the grip he held on me had finally been released. Now he was only a man who shattered everything he came into contact with, then fled when the fragments got too deep. I made myself a cup of coffee in the morning. Once more, it was pouring. And for the first time, the rain didn't seem depressing to me. To me, it was a purification. The old stuff was being washed away. I did something that afternoon that I hadn't done for a while. I compiled a list, not of difficulties, debts, or duties. However, I wanted things for myself. Apply yellow paint on my newly acquired walls. Go to the mountains by yourself. Discover how to prepare authentic sourdough bread. Pardon me, not him, myself. I watched the city shimmer through the drips on the window that night while the lights were off. I wasn't damaged. I was getting better. It turns out that the most exquisite kind of retaliation is healing. Before the tide started to rise, the ripple effects initially appeared gradually, resembling tiny waves grazing the shore. I assumed that the arrest would be the last step. I believed that tranquility would result from cleaning my name. However, recovery is not linear. Furthermore, fallout isn't usually what you anticipate. My half-sister, Danielle, who I hadn't spoken to in more than 10 years, sent me a message on social media 2 days after my father was arrested. We have a father in common. There is very little relationship between us. Less history, too. Her message was brief. I witnessed the event. I apologize. I had no idea he had done that to you. I didn't respond at first. I had no faith in it. I had no faith in her. Anyone who still wore his last name as a badge of honor was untrustworthy in my opinion. However, I responded 2 nights later when the city was silent and my mind was racing. Thank you. I wasn't the only person he hurt. We sent each other a couple more messages. Be cautious. Sincere. Be cautious. As it happened, he had also taken from her, but in a different way. He had taken out a loan from her mother, made unfulfilled promises, vanished, and then resurfaced whenever it was convenient for him. Perhaps that was the most inhumane aspect. He destroyed more than one life. We all have cracks from him. The legal proceedings proceeded in the meantime. My name was cleansed. My credit history was formally cleared of the loans. Several charges of identity theft, wire fraud, and evasion were brought against my father. His attorney contacted him to provide a statement. I did it out of desperation, he said. That he intended to reimburse it. Said he didn't anticipate things progressing this far. However, it did. Furthermore, no apology, no matter how sincere, could ever make up for what he had done to me. When I heard it, though, there was something that allowed me to relax. Not to extend forgiveness, but to put it down. I no longer wanted my identity to be linked to suffering. I therefore began out tiny. I purchased fresh bed linens. I moved my furniture around. Out of duty, not love, I removed the final picture I had of us, the one that had hung over my desk. After that, I did something I never would have imagined doing. I submitted a business financing application. In my name, this time. On my terms, this time. Not with any secrets this time. Not much. Just enough to start a tiny independent design studio, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt I'd have the courage to do. However, being on the other side of treachery transforms you. It teaches you what you can no longer tolerate. It serves as a reminder of your worth. My world began to expand in tandem with my business. Slowly but steadily, clients arrived. Every Thursday morning, I received coffee from a generous neighbor. I turned down a new friend's invitation to a reading group twice before eventually accepting and staying late. These weren't very impressive actions. However, they were secure ones, and safety was radical to someone who had spent so much time in mental turmoil. My mother's sister, my aunt, called me at this time. Years had passed since we last spoke. I always thought she supported my parents, or at the very least, kept quiet for practical reasons. However, when she stated this time, her voice broke. I ought to have raised my voice sooner. I was aware that something was amiss. I simply didn't know how to get in touch with you. I didn't shout. I didn't silence her. I just stated, I'm getting your message now. And it was sufficient. On my way to a meeting later that week, I was passing the courtroom when I noticed my father being carried down the hallway in handcuffs. He failed to notice me. However, I did see him. I glanced at the man who had once been my entire world, the one I had feared, chased, lamented, and trusted, and for a moment, I felt nothing. Don't be angry, not depressed. There's no need to yell, weep, or ask for more from him, because all I needed was already mine again. My name, my tale, my voice. I jotted down in my journal that evening, I made it through him. From what he broke, I rebuilt, and I no longer feel scared. It's not always obvious when someone is healing. Sometimes it's only the silent realization that you are no longer controlled by your past. There are moments when it's better to choose quiet over commotion, and occasionally it's discovering happiness in the smallest, most commonplace things, in the same way that you laugh, like a fresh email from a satisfied customer, like not being afraid when you wake up. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't finished. However, I was going on free from shame, remorse, and the burden of other people's transgressions. And I've discovered that the most potent form of freedom is that nearly 2 years have passed since I saw my father vanish beyond those courtroom doors, his shoulders slumping and his hands in handcuffs not out of regret, but in defeat. I didn't see him again. 6 months later, the ultimate verdict was rendered, guilty on all counts. Along with a reparation order that I knew would never be completed, he was given a 5-year sentence in federal prison. However, I no longer required his money. I'd previously created something much more worthwhile. Even though it was relatively tiny, my studio was mine. My own artwork, not the heritage of others, was displayed on the walls. The bills were earned, honest, and clean. The clients were referred by others, and many were taken aback to discover someone who truly cared and listened. In some respects, I believe that having survived betrayal improved my ability to establish trust. Isn't that amusing? How can the one thing that attempted to shatter you end up making you sharper? Now I rented a peaceful flat in a neighborhood with nice dogs and old trees. Instead of hearing calls from creditors, I woke up to emails and birdsong. Books, the occasional bottle of wine, and occasionally even surprising laughter occupied my evenings. The everyday was peaceful, a completeness I never imagined knowing. My mom gave me a call once. She claimed that she was unaware of my father's actions until it was too late. She claimed to have missed me. I told her I thought she was missing me, but I didn't have to return because I believed. I had sadly discovered that blood is not the foundation of family. It's made with deference, by being present, by doing morally when no one else is around. So I started from scratch and created my own idea of family. When I had the flu, Mr. Patel, a retired school teacher, came over and brought me soup. My favorite customer was Avery, who consistently sent handwritten thank you notes and made early payments. Liza from the book group said, "You've been through something, haven't you?" After glancing at me that first evening, and never demanded anything more. I didn't owe these individuals love. Nevertheless, they gave it. I threw a modest party in my studio one Saturday. The party was not particularly elaborate or extravagant, just a candle that smelt of fresh starts and eucalyptus, wine and jazz music. A person inquired about the selling of the paintings on the rear wall. They weren't, I informed them. Not that they were works of art. However, they were drawn on evenings when I needed to convince myself that I was still here. Therefore, they were pieces of me, standing, still deserving. Liza stayed as the guests left one by one. She asked quietly as she stood next to me in the doorway, gazing out at the city lights. Would you undo everything if you could? I took a while to respond. Because a part of me wanted to shout, yes, wanted to erase every panic attack, every sleepless night, and every time when I wondered if I was even important to anyone. But suddenly I recalled my previous identity. Keep quiet, uneasy, insatiably hungry for acceptance. I was unaware of my own power. And I examined my new self. So I said no, I wouldn't take anything back. I wouldn't swap who I am now, but I wouldn't wish it on anyone. The healing process had taken time. There were 1,000 small options. The decision to leave, the decision to be honest, the decision to remain supple, the decision to hold myself and other people to higher standards. I no longer discuss my father, not due to my anger, but because he no longer merits being at the heart of my narrative. The girl whose identity was stolen is not me. I'm the woman who took it back and made it into something that can't be broken. I still occasionally receive mail addressed to him, previous credit card deals, spam trash. My hands used to shake as I tossed them away. I just smile now, and without another thought, throw them in the garbage, since I am aware of the reality. What he did to me is not who I am. I am the person I have chosen to become. So, if you're listening and you've ever had someone you trusted betray you, if you've ever had to clean up someone else's trash after being abandoned, if you've ever questioned whether starting anew is ever feasible, let me explain. Yes, it is. Yes, you can. You will too. For your history is not a prison, it's a section. On the opposite side of heartbreak, too, is liberty.